Okay, let's go back here. That's probably more than enough. Oh, sorry about that. All right, let's get going here. Oh, lights. Sure, that'll work. All righty. Let's. Okay, so we're talking about youth and religion. We still got, a good amount of content I want to cover. I'm going to try to go through this. Yeah, I have 68 slides in this deck. Okay. Went a little crazy there, Broussard. Yeah, I like this topic. Okay, so this is where we left off on Monday. Okay, really quickly. I'm working on the midterms. I'm really sorry it's taken so long. Just had a lot of stuff jump in and sort of require my attention quickly. So I'm behind in a couple of classes on marking. But as it's spring break coming up, my wife decided to take the kids to Calgary for the weekend. So Friday through Monday, she's gone with the kids, which will probably free up my Saturday and Sunday. And so I'll probably spend it marking until I'm done. So definitely you will have it by the end of the weekend coming up. And it won't be 3 weeks until you get your grades. And then we can, set up review sessions for stuff. It's going well, and the grades look pretty good. But it's just taking me a really, really long time to get through it because I keep getting interrupted by all sorts of things. Yeah, please. The stream has started, yes. It is there, I think. It looks like it's working. Now, hang on, let me check with my phone. It works better if I check with my phone, but it should be working. Où est mon téléphone? I started up a little bit late, but okay, more thrilling. Okay, my channel. Yeah, it looks like it's there. 6 people are watching it.
Hang on, let me check with my phone.
Yeah. There it is. No, stop. I don't want to hear myself ever. Please, thank you. Oh, all right. It works. What was I saying? Okay, yes. So yeah, exams will be back. You'll have them back by the end of the week. I promise. Like the end of the weekend, I promise. If I have to stay till 3 a.m. on Friday, I'll get stuff done. And I'm sorry it's taken so long. Just as you can imagine, for us all, it's a long and overwhelming time of year. Okay, so we ended off on this slide, talking about Kenda Cressy-Dean's take on moralistic therapeutic deism. And I just wanted to stress before I move into some other things that I think are important, this phrase, because I think I rushed through it a little bit on Monday, that MTD is really good. And then maybe I'll tell you a quick anecdote and then I will move on. MTD is really good in a particular way. It's good at making everyone in a society sort of feel like religion is this common thing that everyone shares. And Kendra Christie Dean, in the book, she tells a really interesting anecdote of driving her daughter and her daughter's friend around. And her daughter is Presbyterian, like Kendra Christie Dean is. That's a kind of Protestant Christian denomination. And her daughter's friend is Hindu. And they were talking about their religious beliefs. And, she's listening to this from the front seat, which is where you hear all the good stuff when you have kids and you're driving them around. And they basically, her daughter and her daughter's friend came to the conclusion that basically, one is Hindu and one is Christian, that they both essentially believe the same things. Now, as someone who sort of studies religion, this could scarcely to me sound like a more ridiculous statement. Hinduism and Christianity are both wonderful religions, but to say that they believe the same things is more or less ludicrous. But they're completely different religious systems, come from completely different origins, completely different cosmologies and everything, right? Moral systems, all that stuff. And yet, moralistic therapeutic deism basically, for Dean, and I think she's right, has kind of boiled both religions down to a sort of essence that they share, right? Be nice, be kind, that's the point of life, is to be nice and kind to people. And that's what people sort of take religion to be. And it's not a very rich version of religion, but it is the one that a lot of people have. And so you turn, again, the advantage being, if you have, for someone like Kendra Christie Dean's daughter and her friend, if you have a friend who's Hindu and you're Christian, and you don't have to worry about converting the other person, right? Because you're like, that's fine. We all essentially believe the same thing at the end of the day. It's all different paths up the same mountain. All right. So I will leave it there. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about life outcomes. I'm going to try to do this fast because there's a lot of charts here and a lot of numbers, and I don't want to get too bogged down in it. I honestly find this super fascinating. And I know not everyone does. So I'll try to move through this kind of fast. So out of that first wave of national study of youth and religion, Smith and Denton used a ton of statistical kind of modeling to look at life outcomes amongst adolescents, right? So they used multivariate regression and they controlled for key demographic factors, right? So that certain things wouldn't skew the data. They controlled for things like gender, right? Given that at the time, so this is changing a little bit, girls are a little bit more religious than boys. So if you oversample girls, you kind of have to balance the sample. Age, race, region of residence, right? North is less religious, the South is more religious in the US. Parental marital status, married people, or people whose parents are married, tend to be a little bit more religious and have better life outcomes. Parental education, family income, these are all kind of controlled and rebalanced using different statistical modeling tools so that you don't get a skew in the data. Okay, so what do they kind of find in that first wave and in the kind of interview data from the first wave of national study of youth and religion? Well, basically, most teenagers said religion's a good thing, right? That being religious is probably good for the most part. However, most of them had difficulty explaining how it was consequential or influential in their lives. It was, faith seemed to help them feel good about themselves and maybe behave better. But I think what's kind of important here, most felt their non-religious peers could be just as good and happy as believers. So they didn't see any way that religion really made them different from their peers. So, and yeah, this next one I think is also important and interesting. Most of them, or many of them, had difficulty imagining how their lives would be different if they weren't religious, right? So they couldn't see how religion influenced their lives. And so Smith and Denton wanted to know, does religion make a difference in their lives? And how well do teenagers actually know their own lives compared to those of their peers? Okay, right, so these kind of key questions. I'm going to switch back to my pen here. Are religious youth no highlighter, bad. Are religious youth any different from non-religious youth? And is faith actually consequential? And this is a quote from the book. Although many teenagers cannot see it, according to the findings of the National Study of Youth and Religion, the difference between more and less religious teenagers in the US is actually significant and consistent across every outcome measures. And what did they measure? So things like risk behaviors, quality of family and adult relationships, so how well they get along with their family and adults, moral reasoning and behavior, community participation, media consumption, sexual activity, and emotional well-being. All of those things were markedly better for those who are more religious. Okay, so they basically categorized they categorized the young people according to 4 kind of ideal religious types, and measuring, basically measuring these things: beliefs, practices, experiences, affiliations, and group participation. No questions? So they split basically our categories into 4 types. The devoted, right? So 8% of American teenagers were devoted. These are your most religious, teens. And you can see kind of what what they do. They attend religious services weekly or more. They say it's very important in their life. They feel close to God. They're involved in a religious youth group, right? They're teenagers, pray several times a week, and interact with religious texts once or twice a month. Then you've got your regulars, so still pretty religious, but less religious than these guys. 2 to 3 times a month or weekly. They say faith is not very important, and their other practices are less than the devoted. And then you've got your sporadics. Again, sporadic, you can read the descriptors. I don't have to read them to you. And then the disengaged, right? So, what we see, I think, is that in this first wave, the bulk of our young people were, here over a quarter, and here, almost a fifth. So it was in the regulars and the sporadics, and very, very few young people were in this category of the devoted, right? It's less than 10% of young Americans would be classified as very religious, according to this metric. So, the good news is I have 68 slides, but apparently for some reason I decided to put a question slide every 2 slides, so that should really cut down on the number of slides. Okay, so what do they actually look like in terms of their there are things like risk behaviors. I'll go through this, like I said, really quickly. I don't want to dwell too much on any of this, but we see pretty consistent patterns. So if we look at, this column here, right, this is your average for all teens in the US, right? Smoke cigarettes at least once a day, and all of these risk behaviors. These are our devoteds here, our regulars, our sporadics, our disengaged. Okay, so what do we see, right? On risk behaviors, very few of the devoted smoke, right? It's 1% versus 14 of the disengaged, and that number rises as you get less religiously engaged. Drink alcohol, right? Weekly or more, none there. And then again, moving up. And again, all of these are risk behaviors in teenagers. The more you use substances, more health risks, more kind of risks in general. Gotten drunk every few weeks or more. Again, this number just kind of rises as you go up from 1% of the devoted to 10% of the disengaged. Not a huge percent, but still significant. Smoking marijuana, right? Again, the devoted don't smoke weed regularly. 8% of the disengaged do regularly, and even across occasionally tried once or twice. You see basically it all rises from the devoted being the lowest to the disengaged being the highest. And then it reverses when we go never, right? The further you move away from being religiously disengaged, the higher this number of people who never try it. Now, I will say marijuana is extremely bad for teenagers. We have all sorts of research now suggesting that smoking marijuana is something teenagers should absolutely not do. All sorts of bad outcomes come from it, including things like lower IQ, higher risk of cannabis-induced psychosis, increased risk of schizophrenia, of developing schizophrenia. So weed is very bad for teenagers. After 25, the risk seems to go down. So once you hit 25, smoke as much damn weed as you want, but don't touch the stuff until you're 25. That would be, what the science says. Okay, so, we see these risk behaviors. Cutting class, right, in the last school year, 6 times or more. And again, right, the religiously engaged do it a lot less. And never, many more of the religiously devoted never skip classes, right? 76%. And again, it drops as you go this way down to 48% of the nevers, of the disengaged. Okay, grades, right? They have better grades. Fewer of them are getting C's, D's, and F's than their disengaged peers. Only 1% of them have been expelled from school, or suspended or expelled from school 4 more times versus 9. Again, not a huge number, but there's definitely a difference. And yeah, I mean, not surprisingly, parents don't report that their religiously devoted teenagers are especially rebellious. But every other category is kind of similar, and I would say within sort of margins of error. So it's only our 8% of the religiously devoted that are super conformist, which again, I don't think should surprise us, but I think is interesting. And still a third of religiously devoted teenagers are noted as having a bad temper, but it's still 17% less than the disengaged. So across risk behaviors and getting into trouble, we see big differences. Media consumption, I won't spend too much time on this at all. And this, we're talking about 2000 and, what are we talking? 2000, probably 2001 to 2003 for this wave of the survey. So, lots of things have changed. And I'm going to say, what we see, X-rated pornographic movies, right? The devoted had the least, the disengaged had more, but I think we can kind of disregard this as a modern thing because that's before, smartphones and widespread internet porn was really as prominent. But you kind of see different behaviors, right? Religiously devoted spent less hours watching TV during the week and on weekends, not huge differences. And they watched fewer R-rated movies, right? So, and that's actually a pretty big difference. They're way below the average, right? Average is 29, they're 14, and the disengaged are 42. So that's interesting. All right, so off of this research, Donna Freitas got a look at it, and she wrote, so Donna Freitas, she's the hookup lady, right, from back in Sexuality and Intimacy. So she wrote this book, The Happiness Effect about Social Media, and what she found from that data of the National Study of Youth and Religion was that teens who were more religious tended to have a healthier relationship with social media than non-religious teens. And she specifically noted, and this is a really interesting book actually, it's a little dated now, but I keep coming back to it as I think about what social media does to people, and I think it's really interesting. They have some kind of framework with which to understand social media outside of just their peers, right? They have, and self-worth and all of those things. So religious identity seem to mitigate some of the problems that social media creates in young people's lives. And we'll see this when we talk about social media in a few lectures. Okay, sexual activity, and again, not to be moralistic about sexual activity, I mean, just generally from a psychological perspective, the later the onset of kind of a young person having sexual identity, the more emotionally prepared they are for it, right? So you tend to have better outcomes in terms of sexuality if you kind of wait to have sex into your 20s, generally speaking, right? If you have sex at like 13 to 15, you tend to have more problems from an emotional perspective. And again, it's not a moralistic perspective, it's just sort of, a psychology perspective. Okay, not surprisingly at all, right? More of our religiously devoted folks were, thought that they should wait to have sex until they got married, and this, man, that's a big difference, right? 95% versus 24 for the disengaged, and obviously that number goes way down as we go along. Only 3% of them believe it's okay to have sex if you're emotionally ready for it, versus over half of the disengaged, right? Fewer have been physically, I love this question, by the way. It's such an oddly specific question that I think it's like sort of genius. Have been physically involved with another person more than holding hands and light kissing since turning 13. It's like, what a weirdly obvious, or what a weirdly specific question, right? And again, we see much kind of great differences between them. have you been touched in your private areas? Again, big differences generally across the board. Oral sex, way lower, 11 versus 30%. Had sex, 9 versus 26%. And again, here, all across the, sporadic, regulars to disengage, it's pretty consistent. And, if they've been having sex, they have fewer partners. So again, mitigating some of the potential emotional hurdles that young people face once they start having sex. If you have fewer partners, it is also kind of better. Okay, body image and self-worth. This one sometimes surprises people because there's big differences in terms of body image and self-worth. Oh, I know, it's just charts after charts. Again, just look at the kind of differences. How many say they're very happy? Over half versus 29%, and very unhappy 1 versus 7. Right, so they feel better about themselves. They're less likely to say they feel sad or depressed, usually or never, and more likely to say that they never feel sad or depressed. Feel alone or misunderstood. They're much less likely to say they feel alone or misunderstood. Right, they're the lowest category, so a big difference across the board. They feel more cared for, cared for by people responsible for them. 92%. Say they do versus 73%. 73% is still a good number, but it's not as good a number as 92. So stronger family values on that devoted side. They're less likely to say they feel invisible, although it's the same, for these 3 categories. So it's only apparently being totally religiously disengaged that makes you feel invisible. They feel less guilty. They plan for the future more. They think about the meaning of life considerably more, which kind of makes sense. And how often do they feel life is meaningless? Somewhat less often. Actually, not a huge difference. But they're much more likely to say never. So, again, self-worth, higher for the religiously devoted. Relationships with adults, right? They feel very comfortable talking to adults other than parents. 67% versus 49%. And again, these numbers are fairly comparable. So it's only the religiously devoted that have these really high numbers. Now this one's really important. And I'm going to switch from my highlighter because it's super duper important. Okay, number of adults that they feel they can turn to. So the average for teenagers is 5.7, right? For advice, help, not including parents. For the religiously devoted, it's 8.4, right? And the rest of the categories are actually pretty kind of close to the average. Although you can see none of them come close to 5.7, aside from the regulars. The other 2 are much lower. So clearly the religiously devoted are dragging that number up a little bit. I'll tell you why this is important in a minute, but generally speaking, it's a sort of network effect. The more adults that are involved and a teen feels safer with, the more likely problems are to get caught if a young person starts to run into problems. Number of supportive adults a teen's parents know well enough to talk to. This is actually a huge difference, right? 7.3 versus 3.4. So there's more people, and again, look at how much higher above the average the devoted are. Again, when I talk about I think it's 9, 10 factors, maybe it's 9 cultural factors. I'll explain this again. But having more supportive adults a teen's parents know well enough to talk to, it's a network effect, right? And again, more likely things get caught if something starts to go wrong in a young person's life. A little bit less time spent alone on both weekends and during the week, or afternoons and evenings spent alone. So they're more supervised, right? And again, lack of supervision tends to lead young people to get into more trouble, right? If you're supervised, you get into less trouble. If you're unsupervised, you get into more. So, good times had by all. All right, moral reasoning behavior. All the things that the religious apologists say about atheists and non-religious people being less moral are all true. No, I'm kidding. But what we see definitely, and again, this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the course when we talked about the fact that a lot of teenagers now are sort of what we would call moral consequentialists, right? So what we see, when we talk about all these categories, but especially these 2, right, your least religious part of the cohort, they're much more likely to say morals are relative, right? There's no definite right or wrong. So they're moral relativists. And here's the consequentialist aspect. If you're unsure about what might be right or wrong, and again, pretty consistent across these three blocks, you would choose whatever would help them get ahead, right? So morals come down to consequences, and if unsure what's right or wrong, would choose what makes you happy. And again, the big difference here is in the moral reasoning behavior, from the devoted to all the other categories. And again, really, really kind of big shifts across the board. Have they lied to their parents in the past year, cheated on tests, right? You can see all the differences there, and did things they hoped their parents would never find out about. Again, low here, low and high, high and low. Kind of, and not huge differences. Like a big difference from here to here, and these categories are a lot closer to the disengaged. So again, we see differences in the way that young people reason morally, how they choose their actions, what their basis is, right? Only 1% of the devoted say that if they're unsure about what's right or wrong, they would do whatever helps them get ahead. And only 6%, say that they would do whatever makes them feel happy. So I'll talk about moral reasoning in a sec. It matters. I'll do these ones really quickly. I won't circle anything. The devoted here seem more concerned with questions of social justice, including racial justice. And if you look at the numbers here, they take more action on it, right? They do things like volunteer more. They regularly volunteer quite a bit more, twice as much. They give more money, right? And they belong to more. This one's actually really important. I actually should highlight this. Average number of regular organized activities, clubs, classes, or organized events, 3.1. The disengaged are half as many, right? So definitely something to think about. And it's important, right? Because, again, network effects. The more integrated you are into networks, the better you tend to do in life in general. Okay, so I got through those pretty quick, given how many numbers I circled and lines I drew. All right, so a couple of concluding remarks, and then we're going to get to probably my favorite slide in the entire course, because it's just text and it takes like forever to explain, which I'm sure everyone loves, right? This is the slide that breaks people on the exam if they just study the slides, because they're like, I have no idea what any of these words mean. And I will say, ChatGPT and Copilot and Gemini have no idea what the hell you're talking about. So, just FYI. Okay, so some concluding remarks. Smith and Denton basically say, okay, it's pretty clear from all the numbers they have in those tables, there's differences between the most religious and less religious teenagers, pretty significant ones. Some more significant, some less significant across the board. So why do even religious teenagers say they don't really see a difference between them and their peers? Okay, don't we all? They lack perspective on their own lives. It's hard to get a large comparative viewpoint, right? And here, this is the point of sociology, right? When we think about our own lives, it's hard to get a generalized view. We need some of those big statistical tools to get a picture of the world that's accurate, right? Quantitative research matters. So does qualitative, but quantitative is important for getting that comparative viewpoint. And the sample size for teenagers is so small that they can't see their lives accurately. And this other one, okay, I like this. I'm going to highlight it because I like it so much, and I think it explains a lot. Most teenagers believe they're not influenced. That's not a highlighter. I'm angry. All right, I had to fix it. I'm sorry. I can just see the USRI comments is like, really loves circling things. And I do. I love circling things. All right. Most American teenagers believe they're not influenced directly by anything at all, religious or otherwise. Okay, what does that mean? We tend to think, we have such an individualized basis of what we think we are, right? That we choose our own identities, we choose our own behaviors. We don't see the social, right? We don't see the social aspects. We don't see the institutional aspects. That's yellow, and that's not going to help. Yeah, so we don't see the social, and we don't see the institutional aspects of our own lives, right? We're really bad at figuring that out, and we think that we make all our decisions on our own. And I would say this is as true for adults as it is for almost anyone else. We think because we're so individualistic that all of our values, beliefs are shaped solely by us, and we don't see how our parents, our communities, and such make a difference, and we can't see that in other people either. Right, again, sociology really useful here for figuring out, okay, there are these broader social patterns. So, yeah, teenagers, not that self-reflective. Sorry, you were teenagers much more recently than I was. And I can say, given my experience with teenagers, they're lovely human beings, but self-reflection is not amongst their greatest traits. They will get there, hopefully. Oh my God, I hope so. My daughter's 14. Self-reflection would do her some good. If she could master that sometime in the next 5 years, I would be super grateful. Okay, I'm saying bad things about my 14-year-old daughter. Love her to bits, but she spent 45 minutes arguing that we should let her out of doing her dishes because she has homework to do, and if she had just done her dishes, it literally took 15 minutes. So, self-reflection, not great. All right. And yeah, I mean, we've got an ingrained voluntarism in our culture, right? Which means basically we're super individualistic. So we tend to think we're autonomous, self-defining individuals that set our own identities, and we can't see our broader social climate. We're super bad at it. Okay, so this is a sort of counter argument here. So if we take these 2 points, all right, what could another explanation be for why the devoted tend to have way lower risk behaviors especially, but tend to have better life outcomes on the whole? Okay. It may be, and Smith and Denton sort of posit, that it could be that the people who are attracted to religion, who find religion to be an appealing system, right, something they want to adhere to, because it gives you kind of set morals, set values, things that are really easy to follow, in a sense, and really clear moral guidelines, might be of the type whose personalities are more risk averse to begin with, right? So religion tends to attract risk averse people who do not like taking risks. And therefore, what you're going to get is people who take less risks and therefore, right, don't smoke weed, don't do drugs, don't skip school, get good grades. All of those things are going, religion is going to attract that type of person. And so naturally, your most devoted religious young people are also going to be the most risk averse, and therefore, in a lot of ways, those who have, especially in adolescence, where being risk averse is helpful, really good life outcomes. However, the reverse then is also true. Your most risk tolerant young people, those who are, the most dynamic, the most kind of, they're risk takers, they like to try lots of things, they're more likely to try substances, they're a little bit more impulsive, are going to be selected out of religion because religion doesn't value those traits. And so basically they're going to kind of get shifted out of those communities. So you're going to end up with the most disengaged young people being the most risk tolerant. And so yes, it's going to look like their life outcomes, at least early on, are going to be pretty questionable, right? Like they're going to have worse relationships, they're going to try more substances, they're going to have sex more, and all of those kinds of things. So we call this, it's kind of a reverse selection bias, right? Basically, we're selecting out all the most risk-tolerant people from religion, so we get the people with the safest looking life outcomes. So that's a possible explanation that Smith and Denton posit, right? Religion is for the risk-averse, disengagement is for the risk-tolerant, and so it's going to look very clearly like worse life outcomes for one group. All right. This may explain also why religion has traditionally been a little bit more attractive to women than men. Women on the whole, culturally, are more risk averse than men are. All right, so the slide of 9 things. All right, I'll do my best to finish this up before we have to wrap. I know there's 12 minutes, and that probably seems like a lot. Just want to see if there's any questions. There are not. Yeah, so basically, Smith and Denton posit 9 cultural explanations or cultural factors they suggest also probably play a big role in the fact that religious youth, or those devoted youth, have better life outcomes on the whole. All right, so the first one is what they call moral order. And I think it would surprise no one that religions have very set moral codes, right? They posit what's right and wrong, and there are and especially, say a really old and really kind of systematized religion like, say, Roman Catholicism, have really, really clear guidelines on what's moral, what's immoral, what you can do, what you can't do, and all of those things, right? If you ever want to find out, it's a really fat book. It's called The Catechism of the Catholic Church. It's got all the rules in it, absolutely all of them. It's a fun read. It is not a fun read. Anyway, so moral order. So there's a clear set of moral rules. So what does that do? As opposed to sort of a consequentialist reasoning, this would be, probably what you would call duty-based ethics, or maybe like virtue-based ethics, which means you kind of know what the rules are and what you're supposed to do, as opposed to making kind of what you would call ad hoc moral decisions, right? So if you look at your less religious young people, they're more likely to be making ad hoc moral decisions, which means they're making them in the moment, as opposed to your religiously devoted youth, where like, okay, it's almost like a decision tree. It's like, I don't want to be glib about it, but I'm going to be a little glib about it. It's like, okay, I have the opportunity to cheat on my test. Should I do that? Well, you kind of fall in. What would Jesus do? Would Jesus cheat on his test? Of course he wouldn't. And therefore, I shouldn't cheat on my test either, right? People used to walk around in the 90s with "What would Jesus do" bracelets. It was a big thing. Anyway, there are clear codes, right? Or it's like, what's right according to the Torah or the Talmud, right? If you're Jewish, or the Quran if you're Muslim, right? There are clear kind of codes as to what's right and wrong, and typically, especially the most devoted religious believers, will have a really clear decision tree. It's like, is that allowed by my religion? Yes or no? If it's no, you don't do it. Whereas if you are, and again, you saw it in that chart, if you are kind of more disengaged, you don't have a clear moral code that's as simple, right? It comes down to, will it help you? Will it hurt other people? Will it make you more happy, right? And this is moral consequentialism at its core. Now, what does that do? So the people who are more devoted and have that clear moral order basically kind of fall in here, right? The American culture, Canadian culture as well, has been shaped by its long interaction with Judeo-Christian beliefs. And so what it tends to prize as personal qualities, honesty, hard work, fairness, all of those things are sort of built into those religions. So for young people who follow that, they're going to automatically fall into the category of people that have the most beneficial moral traits that most people in a society are going to value inherently, right? And so they tend to do a little bit better. Okay, does that all make sense? Okay, yeah? All right. So spiritual experiences, all right, and I will say, out of these, only a couple of them really relate to religion. And I think you can kind of see, like, this one for sure, I think this one, and maybe I will say this one. All of these other things are relatively possible, and I think common outside of religious groups. But, moral order is a little bit different for religious people, and spiritual experience is obviously something that's a little bit different for religious people as well. So, not all of these are actually religious. It's just that you tend to find them more consistently, according to Smith and Denton, in religious young people. Okay, so spiritual experience is a really easy one. I can do that really quick, and the time is running out on me. Basically, you have your moral commitments, you have your constructive life practices, and when you're a religious person, you'll pray and feel like you receive some kind of answer, or you have, religious experiences that basically support your commitment to those constructive life practices. You go to a worship service and you feel the Holy Spirit moving, or whatever it happens to be for the particular religious tradition that you're in, but you have spiritual experiences that reaffirm those moral commitments. So they get stronger, right? So you move, this part gets even stronger from spiritual experiences. Okay, role models. So again, there's nothing saying in here, provide positive experiences. Examples of those shaped by religious order. Obviously, you can have role models outside of religious communities as well. Now, the tendency will be, and if you remember those numbers that I highlighted, you're probably going to have more of them if you're a religiously devoted young person. So, religious models, right? People who show you role models, and this is especially true. This is getting truer for millennials and for Gen Z as a lot of them deinstitutionalize. Religious young people are going to have far more role models in general within their religious communities that show them what a good life lived looks like. People who have been successful, who have great families, right? Who are doing well, who are following the rules. All of those things that are going to, again, reinforce that moral order strongly. Okay, so I guess the next few are all things that you kind of gain in communities. So community and leadership skills, one of the things that Smith and Denton noted was that young people who were part of religious communities, especially those that were a regular part of religious communities, were more likely at younger ages to be put in leadership positions. And so they would develop community and leadership skills. So they would learn how to, say, ask adults for things, get help from adults, but also they would often be put in positions of leadership. So, at young ages, they might be put in, say like a children's ministry, working with young children where they got to kind of show themselves as leaders to younger members of that community, right? So they take a leadership position, and as they grow up, they take on more and more leadership roles. So this is I'm jumping around a little bit. This is the sort of like Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours sort of reasoning. It's not that you can't develop leadership skills later on in life. It's just that by the time they get to be adults, what Smith and Denton are arguing is that the young people who've been given, community kind of work or chances to navigate communities and develop leadership skills at younger ages are going to be better at it. So they're going to seem like you're, by the time you get to say, high school and university and emerging adulthood, they're going to be better leaders because they've practiced it more, right? They're going to be more natural at taking on some of those roles and taking on responsibility. So they're going to be already good at it, more so than someone who didn't have those opportunities younger. So they get more of these opportunities to practice leadership skills at young ages. Okay, this one, which I said is kind of, not unique to religion, but religion definitely has sort of unique ways of dealing with life problems, right? So, this is predicated on a sort of adage. I'll write it here. Right? Shit happens. Life is not easy for anyone, right? Life is not easy. You run into troubles, parents die, families break up, friends die, you're struggling in school, all sorts of shit happens in life. However, what religion offers is coping skills. I'm not going to circle anything or write anything else. Specific coping skills, right? It offers you scripts. It offers you scripts of how you deal with life when shit happens. In ways that, again, when you talk about your less religious young people, a lot of that is a little bit more ad hoc. Like, let's say you're Jewish, right? And somebody in your community dies. What do? Well, you sit Shiva, right? The whole community comes in and kind of takes care of that person and is with them in community for 7 days, right? You go, you sit Shiva, you just surround that person. And there's no real question. It's just what you do in that particular community, right? In Christian communities, Muslim communities, there are, when bad stuff happens, there are scripts you follow to deal with life's problems. And so basically religions offer young people immediate coping skills and scripts to follow. So if you're struggling with something, you don't have to go read some, Dr. Oz or what's the other one? The fat one. Dr. Phil. Sorry, is he still fat? He might have trimmed down. I haven't seen Dr. Phil in decades. I know he's still around. Right, you don't have to go listen to Dr. Phil. You're just like, okay, what would Jesus do? Okay, this is what Jesus would do. Or what would Muhammad do? Well, this is what Muhammad would do. Right? What does a good Muslim do? What does a Jew do? What does a Hindu do when they're faced with these things, right? So religion offers you a way of sort of dealing with that. Okay. Oh, I do not have time to do these last ones. I'm going to try to do this, and I'll probably stop at network closure, because network closure is super important. I'm going to put a big happy face here. Tell me to start here next time. But I'm going to try to do, that's a great happy face. What happened there? This pen is terrible. There, better-ish. Okay, now he looks like he's having a stroke. Okay. Cultural capital and social capital. Okay, so related a little bit, and I know I'm running out of time, to things like community and leadership skills. Being in community, right? And remember, they partake in more groups, right? They know more adults, right? They have more adults that they're connected to and that their families are connected to. So what you build is an affinity and an ability to talk to adults, to get help from people, to sell yourself, to present yourself in such a way to people in your community so that they help you, right? Being in communities and being in kind of a tightly bound social networks means that you're interacting with people of multiple ages, you're asking them for things, you're getting their help, you're learning how to talk to adults and to get adults to help you, to get people to invest in you. That's ultimately just what cultural capital is. And again, it's not that you can't get this outside. You just have a natural place, if you're a religiously devoted young person, to practice those skills, to make mistakes, knowing that you're kind of safe and no one's going to hate you if it kind of falls apart. You know what to do in this space and you get a lot of reps, right? Practice, practice, practice. You learn how to present yourself. You learn how to make people invest in you. And here, social capital. So social capital, right, is always this idea of it's not what you know, it's who you know. Religious communities offer instant social networks so that if you're trying to get help, getting that first job, getting into law school, you need a tutor, whatever it is you need, you have this community and it's not age stratified, right? And this is super important because increasingly young people live in an almost completely age stratified world, right? From in all their schooling, they're always with peers of their own age. And there's fewer and fewer places where they are in communities with people who are of different ages than them. Even when they enter the workforce, right? Even when they start working, they're typically working in industries that are very youth-oriented because they're bottom of the kind of work ladder. So religious communities offer one of the last places that youth still go in some considerable numbers where they are interacting with adults of other ages and they can build connections with them and get those adults to help them. Okay, like I said, we'll pick up network closure and extra community links next time, and we'll keep going. I don't know, should I keep my doodles? I will, for now. Alrighty. Goodbye, online friends.